From Orlando, Florida and Tulsa, Oklahoma, welcome to the 1330 Podcast with your hosts, Keith Neighbor and Brent Bailey. Pulling from nearly half a century of experience, Brent and Keith share unique wisdom and proven insight to build the leader within you. Interact with us now on Facebook and Twitter at 1330 Podcast or email your questions and comments to 1330podcast@gmail.com. The 1330 Podcast starts right now.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another 1330 Podcast. I'm Brent Bailey.
I am Keith Neighbor, along with our very special guest, Mr. Dan Taylor. Greet the people, Dan.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
Dan is a good friend of ours that worked with us at Rhema Bible Church in the youth department and was the architect of what our vision was. We decided that we wanted to have a band full of teenagers. Now, up to this point, we had a tremendous worship band in the youth department there.
Well, tremendous worship bands, plural.
Yes, because we did run separate services, junior high and senior high, and they were all adults, and there's nothing wrong with that. We loved every one of those guys. They were great, but I just happened to say one day to Keith, I think we were running down to the ranch for something, which we owned. The church owns a ranch about an hour south of Tulsa, and I said, I'd really like to see a band full of teenagers up there. And Keith looked at me and was like, yeah, that would be awesome. And I remember mentioning it to one other person, and they were like, oh, that will never work. You'll never, because really the folks that were doing it were invested a lot of time, and it was kind of their deal. And without ever saying anything, I literally got on my knees and prayed for it to happen. And over a period of about 2 years, it took before we ever got to see teenagers up there.
And what he just said about getting on his knees and praying, pastors, you need to hear those words, because just wanting something and just whining about something isn't enough to get it done.
Come on, somebody.
If you want to have not a good band, but a great band, you are going to have to invest time in prayer over that, and you are really going to have to speak that into existence, because I tried the whining and crying and complaining route and just wanting, but it never got me where I needed to be. The only thing that ever got me to the excellence where it was not me, was really my prayers and the Lord answering those prayers and sending awesome people to us that had a heart to worship.
That's what I was going to say. We got a few small youngsters in there, some teenagers that were in there. But then the next thing is we needed to have the right person, and the Lord sent us the right person to kind of spearhead the effort. And that's when Dan came into the picture, and we started really developing a band with a bunch of teenagers.
But let's give a throw or a shout out here and throw it back a little bit. The one who initially started this was Glenn. Glenn Henry was the one who started this for us, and he did it with the junior hires way back in the day. And the Glenn Henry School of Music really started out of him working with all these teenagers. He would come in and
tell everybody who he is. I mean, he's a
Glenn is an unbelievable musician and an unbelievable person. Can play anything, and it literally can play any instrument. And this guy came in and just told me, hey, if you want to have teenagers play, I'll head the band up. And he did, and I literally did nothing with it other than say, you guys are practicing after service tonight. And that was the extent of my involvement in it, because I'm not a musician, but he is. And this guy, if a kid came up, I said, we had a girl come up who played clarinet, and he wrote a part for her. So we had a girl who played clarinet in our worship band for a time. We also had a violin player. We had a kid who wanted to play trumpet but wouldn't show up for practices, but he had parts written for him. But any instrument would be in that band with them. And that was really the beginning stages of it. And then the Lord sent Dan Taylor to us. And that's when the dynamic duo of Glenn and Dan took off, and that's where it started to happen.
You had Glenn teaching the technical this is how you play this instrument, this is how you play this note, this is how you keep this beat or whatever. And then we were blessed with Dan, who was, and daggone it, you're going to play it like this or I'm going to break my foot off in your hind end.
Yeah, Glenn was the softy, and Conrad, Dan Taylor, showed up once in a while for the.
But that's kind of what we're talking about here. Was this? It started as a dream, really, and we had some direction from our pastor to get kids, to turn kids on to God, and that's what he really wanted. Let them use their talents in the church and that kind of thing. And so we started this as a dream, and then when we started that, we had a small inkling of people, but we were talking about this in our pre-meeting here. You're going to have people there, and then you start adding in what you want, and you kind of have to let the other group just kind of find their way out.
Yeah, basically, the people who, first of all, it kind of starts with a dream and a vision of what you want. You started with, this is what I want. I want teenagers, and I want them in to learn about worship. And so it starts with that. Once you get that moving, then kind of once you set your vision up, the people who are in will ride it out with you, and the people who aren't, they will kind of fall to the wayside a little bit. They will kind of go their own way. We had a few people in our band who were very talented musicians, extraordinarily talented songwriters, but their goal and their vision for music, they had no heart for the worship side of it. And so one of our main goals was making sure that whoever was in the band, whether they were 60 or whether they were 12, you need to understand what the purpose of worship was. And understand why we are here. And so you kind of lose, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't want to paint a bad picture for those people, but worship just wasn't their gig. It wasn't their thing. Music, performance music was their gig.
Right, and you're going to have those people are naturally going to come in because musicians are musicians. I mean, you start playing an instrument or you start singing. If you got musical bones in your body, it appeals to you.
Right.
But there's just some people, I mean, we all know it, that are going to write performance-style music, and they're going to perform it way better. My wife is kind of geared that way. My wife is kind of a performance singer. She can sing in a worship group, but she's not a worship leader at all.
And you're going to have a few people who can do both. You will have a few people who will have their performance thing that they do on the side when they're not at church or when they're not practicing, and be able to fall into your vision for worship. But then you'll have a few people who will be there to help you get started and be there to get things moving. But then after a while, it's just not their cup of tea.
Now, you said it in the last podcast, though. At first, you should use anybody that's there. So if the performance singers walk in, then you grab hold of them.
Grab them. First band I was ever in had a ex-Christian rock band, kind of a local rock band, and a night lounge singer was our worship leader. And so
nice.
Murph and the Magic Tones.
Right. And what we do, we put together as the best worship music that we could. When it was all said and done, both of those people moved on to do other things.
Well, I was going to say, we went through that too. We had a young lady who is just unbelievable. She's a monster when it comes to performing.
Yeah.
And she did serve with us for a good year and a half. And so getting the right people in there will come.
Yes, definitely. But you have to stay strong with the vision. It's if you have a purpose and you know what you want to do, if you give in, because there were several times in talking, to a few of those people that you kind of wanted to give in to their performance a little bit. They painted a good enough picture of it that you thought, man, maybe we could do this. Maybe we should do, but you have to stick to the vision of what they have. And
so in the meantime, while we're developing teenagers, now again, we're talking about teenagers, but now this will apply. This applies to adults too. I mean, I'm at a stage right now in my church where we're seeing this is starting to gel and take effect, and we're starting to see the same. It works here too. The vision is keeping strong, but then you have to really just lean on who's there and allow those people to carry that out.
I also think that you need to reinforce what you want through encouragement. If when you see them doing what you want, or there's that one song that, during that service where it's like, yes, this is what I want. As soon as that service is over, as the pastor over that service, you need to go and encourage them and say, man, you guys, you were firing on all cylinders during that song. That is what we're looking for. That's what we desire. And I think that if you'll encourage towards those things, and this is...
It might need to be done by faith at first, too.
Yes, it may need to be... No, it might not. It will need to be done by faith.
At first, yes.
Or just the little things. Sometimes it's not the big encouragement that matters, but it's the step. It's the guy that you've been working on this drum beat for forever, and he finally got part of it right. So you praise him for it and go, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. And all the time, anybody in any band would ever tell you they would do something, and I immediately go, oh, man, that is it. That is what I'm looking for. And it's that encouragement that makes them feel like they can do the next thing.
Now, how many times, though, did you go home and want to pull your hair out?
Several times. Several times.
And I think that's the point we're trying to get across here is that pastors or leaders or whatever you're not going to see perfection at first except by the eyes of faith. And there's so many pastors that give up on this aspect when they get to this point. They don't encourage because they don't see it yet.
Right, but one of the other ones, as a guy who's not a musician, I think that I would have been the greatest guy in the world to be a pastor for, to want to work for somebody like me because I'm not musical. I know what I want and I know what I like musically, but I stayed out of everybody's hair. If I had a song that I really liked, I might tell the guys, hey, or the band, I like this song. Would you guys learn this song? Or I really don't like that song. Never do that song again. But my job with the music was to be an encourager. And I made it my job as the pastor over the junior high youth ministry and those people in the band. And I did it with the high school. I did it with the whole band. I did it, and Brent did too. We made it our job to be encouragers, not the ones who sat in on practices telling everybody what they were doing wrong or right or whatever, because we couldn't necessarily tell you how to correct it.
Right.
So pastors, as you're out there, let your people do what they're good at. Let your people, if they've got excellence in them for this, or even if they don't and it's developing, let them develop this area and let it be their area of ministry and let it go. Stop trying to run everything.
Yeah, I know pastors that sit there with a notebook and write down songs they don't like and then hand it in. I think I told Dan twice songs that I didn't like.
I still remember the one time. It was right after Summer Blitz.
Which is our big youth conference we did.
Which is the greatest, one of our biggest. We were downtown. It was my first time ever. And I remember Brent gave me the encouragement. You did great, but never do that one song again. So it was great encouragement, yet I still knew what he wanted.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of another 1330 podcast, Dan is going to be with us again for about the next 5 or 6 of these. I don't know how many we're doing with him, but he's going to continue on with this. If you're getting something out of this, let us know. It's 1330podcast@gmail.com. All right. Until next time, this is Brent Bailey.
I'm Keith Neighbor.
Along with Dan Taylor. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for joining us for the 1330 podcast with Brent and Keith. We want to hear from you. Find us on Facebook and Twitter today at 1330 Podcast or email us directly at 1330podcast@gmail.com. Join us next time for another 13 minutes and 30 seconds geared to change you into the leader that you and those who follow you want you to be.